So today's video is going to be all about how to deload and also how to taper correctly, because it's come through a couple of questions, but I do hear it a lot. A lot of athletes get very confused, and coaches as well, on how to actually use those recovery weeks to then lead into a race correctly. Where do you drop volume? What do you do with intensity? How can we actually manipulate our sessions? So today's all about the recovery weeks or the deload weeks within your training plan, how it all fits in, why do we have them, but then also how do you taper correctly leading into a race. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel, talking everything science of endurance and sports science in general. Hopefully you've been enjoying the content so far. And as I said in the previous video, going to be in lockdown for 6 weeks here in Melbourne. So hopefully we'll be able to get out a little bit more regular content, at least over the next 6 weeks. But if you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, because that's where a large amount of these videos have come from. Another great question coming through for this one, all about deload and how do we taper correctly, what variables do we manipulate, and what do we need to do to make sure we're getting the most out of those recovery components to then perform at our best. Before I get into that, make sure you do hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with all the latest videos. I said in the last one, 94% of people who've been watching the videos aren't subscribed, so make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and looking forward to seeing all of you in a future video outside this one as well. Make sure you go check out all the old videos that are up. I know that the VO2 Max on the Garmin video is almost at 100,000 views, which is just absolutely insane. So make sure you go check that one out. I might link it above as well, so you can go look at it later. Like I said, today, getting back to what we're talking about is deload weeks, recovery, and then taper. So first of all, why do we actually have these in our program? And the main reason is because of what we call the supercompensation response. The body goes through this stress phase where when we train, it causes fatigue or induces some sort of fatigue. There's damage internally, physiologically. We're beating ourselves up, but the purpose of doing the training and beating ourselves up is to allow the body to recover and respond. And this is where we go through what's called supercompensation, is that we start at a relatively moderate performance level, or low performance level. We induce fatigue, so we actually reduce performance momentarily. We go through a recovery cycle that brings us out of that, and the recovery ideally brings us out and the body's adapted, so we end up above and beyond where we began in terms of performance level. What I'm getting at here is the body gets fatigued, it recovers, it responds, it gets better, is the really simple version. So how do we actually incorporate that cycle into our training? We need to have some sort of fatiguing or stressful response, which is going to be your training. And that's the easy one a lot of athletes can sort of manage, is that we know how to go out and train hard and beat ourselves up over a period of time. But then we need to have the recovery week. So what I'm going to put up on the screen here is just a very simple diagram of how progressive overload, so how you build your weekly volume up and up and up, works in with the deload week. And we can see here the blue is your building week, so week 1, 2, and 3. This is using a 4-week cycle, where the deload week is on the 4th week. You might prefer to use 2-week build and then 1-week deload. Particularly older athletes might find this a little bit more durable or more sustainable for their durability in terms of injury, being able to get through long-term training plans. Some athletes might want to push for a 5-week cycle. I generally don't recommend it too much, but you might want to. 4 is the typical. And what we've got here is we have building weeks that are going up by about 2 to 10% each week in terms of total training volume. Now, training volume is made up of 2 components. It's essentially intensity multiplied by the duration. So how long are you doing something for, and how hard are you doing something? Multiply those together, it gives you that. If you use something like Training Peaks, you can use like your training stress score, TSS. You might want to just do it as simple as minutes times RPE. That is a very simple method that has been proven to give a reasonable accuracy in terms of data analysis. However you want to do it, we just need to increase our training volume by about 2 to 10% each week. 10% is quite aggressive, 2% is quite conservative. 2 to 5% I find is a typical sort of benchmark, but it's also the type of thing that I don't necessarily go in and directly calculate each week for each session what is 2 to 10%. Obviously, a lot of you are going to know, if you're a cyclist or a triathlete, it's very easy to add on an extra 10 or 15 minutes into your long, slow ride, or even potentially up to half an hour. It's quite easy to add on each week. Why is that the case? Because you're unloaded on the legs. It's quite economical. There's not as much stress in the body, and the extra half an hour doesn't impact you as much as, say, if you added an extra half an hour running, it might make a bit more of a difference to fatigue. So keep that in mind. I don't strictly calculate, it's 11.5% or 10.5%, I'm doing too much. You got to play it a little bit in terms of, is it too much? Obviously, you can calculate it to an extent, but also keep in mind what your body might be able to tolerate, where you are in terms of your training cycle, the overall training plan, and what is actually realistic in terms of being able to recover for the discipline. Adding on an extra 1.5K of swimming when you haven't done a lot of swimming is not a good idea. Adding on an extra 15, 20 minutes of running when your longest run's been half an hour, and now you're trying to go up and do 45 minutes straight away, again, might not be the best idea. But if you've done lots of runs at 40 minutes and you add on only 5 minutes, that's a bit more conservative. That might be okay. So it is a bit of, you got to sort of play with it a little bit and learn how your body responds and how aggressive you can go at certain parts. But 2 to 10% per week is a general rule to get you in a pretty sort of moderate stage of progression. But we can see here we've got 3 weeks building. Then we have a week 4 where we're reducing the training load by at least 20%. Now, I've shown in this diagram a very aggressive deload, and why I say at least 20% is that we want to have enough recovery that compared to the previous couple of weeks, we don't feel like we're doing as much. The key in this, though, and I'll revisit this when I talk about taper, the key in this is that we can't afford to reduce the intensity. We're maintaining intensity in this week, so nothing drops there. If you're doing VO2 intervals 2 to 4 minutes on at 95% of your max, you're doing 6 by 3 minute efforts, big session in week 3. Week 4, you might just do 6 by 2 minute efforts, but you're still hitting 95% of max. Why is it critical to maintain the intensity? Is because when we maintain the intensity, that's where we get the maintenance of all of the adaptations we've just tried to develop in weeks 1, 2, and 3, those building weeks. If we drop the intensity, we're not getting the stimulus and the body basically starts to detrain itself. And it's a really easy way to lose fitness is by dropping the high intensity sessions. What we want to do is actually reduce a lot of the volume or the volume from the week total, but predominantly from the duration side of things. So that's mostly going to come from your longer, slower sessions, your base type K sessions, your long, slow, continuous zone 2 endurance, whatever you want to call it. Reducing those by about 20% is going to be useful. You may even want to get a bit more aggressive. If you've gone through a deliberately hard 3-week block leading into a major event, or an A race, for example, you might want to go a little bit more aggressive and take off 30 or 40% and really recover yourself up to bounce back out. Again, everyone's a little bit different. You might also find that a 1 week deload actually puts you in an average state for, say, in this circumstance, week 5. It might take you that next week just to get yourself back in the groove of training again to get going. But following this structure, you typically can't go too wrong because you're allowing an adequate enough recovery by at least dropping by 20% in that deload week. If you drop by more, you can have more recovery. Theoretically, it should be better, but it's the type of thing you want to still keep training to some extent so we don't drop off completely in terms of chronic training load. And that's where this next diagram comes in, is how does this now fit into the whole progression? What I've got here is three blocks building on each other, and you can see the blue is gradually increasing chronic training load. We're constantly building on what we've got before, but we're having these block periods in there, and you can see after each green block, particularly those 2 in the middle, we're able to then increase the training load in the following week a little bit more than what we have done previously, and then it allows us to get this stepwise progression up. So by the end of a 12-week block in this circumstance, we've got three blocks of 4. At the end of 12 weeks, we're actually at a much higher level in terms of overall training load. We can tolerate a lot more. Ideally, the body's able to has adapted by now, and it can actually outperform what it could at the beginning of that 12 weeks. Depends, obviously, the types of sessions. We're not getting into that. It's mainly just this focus of progressive overload, and the deload's there to allow us to then jump up and challenge the body further in that next block and challenge it again and again and again. So you can see how this allows you to just build and build and build. Now, in terms of the tapering side of things, which is the last thing I'm going to cover today, really, it's a very similar philosophy as we're trying to maintain intensity. And that's why I've circled it, I've highlighted it, I've done everything I can to show you on the screen right now that intensity has to be maintained. That's the easiest way to lose your fitness and basically throw out the window all the adaptation that you've developed over the last potentially 6 months, 4 months, however long you've been training for the event, is by dropping the intensity and keeping the volume, or dropping the volume and intensity. What we want to do in a taper is, you can see the final build in the blue here, is we've got big training volume. So we've been working really hard leading into a race. We then want to start dropping, and for some people it's going to be a 2-week taper. For some it might be a 10-day. For some it might be a 4 to 7 day. Depends on the length of your event. Marathon runners can get away with less compared to an Ironman athlete. That's a bit of individual difference in how you like to train and adapt and how you like to recover. Some athletes like to do an early taper and then almost have a training week on the week of the race. That's going to be a bit individual. But what we typically follow is a structure of dropping it by about 50% volume per week in terms of the taper over like a 2-week period is pretty common. That sort of 14-day period, 10 to 14. But again, intensity is maintained. We want to maintain the intensity we've been working at, the good quality, the race quality effort. We're just doing it for a shorter period of time. It's a really easy way to get your head around. I'm doing the same work I was doing 2-3 weeks ago, but I'm not doing it for anywhere near as long. I'm doing it for half as long. So I should really, based on the training I've done, I should be able to recover from this a hell of a lot faster, but still maintain. Because this point of the taper is to get us prepared for race dates, not to improve any further, because we've run out of time. It's too late for that. By trying to make up sessions and trying to do too much before the race, you're just blowing yourself up. The point of this taper is recovery. We need some stimulus to keep us going, some stimulus to maintain what we've got, but we need to have an emphasis on being able to recover and repair so that the body can go through that super compensation, like I said at the beginning of the video, to get itself up to a performance level above and beyond where it was initially. So hopefully this is giving you a bit of an insight in terms of the deload process, what we do in a taper, how does it all work into the overall plan. Let me know if you have any questions down below in the comments about deloading and about these recovery components that lead to the super compensation. When do you like to have your deload? Every 4th week? 3rd week, 5th week? Let me know in the comments as well. Make sure, as always, you do hit the subscribe button down below to support the channel. I've been loving all the comments and support so far. That's it for today, and we'll see you in the next one.